Candace looked him in the eye. "Why didn't you ever talk about Solemin?" Before his answer was almost a whisper, "Because it hurt, and because I feared people would think I was weak." She shook her head, eyes moist again. "No, this is the strongest thing I've ever seen." There was silence. Then Traoré spoke again. "Maybe it's time to build the school not as a promise, but as a beginning, Candace Owens." Started as a tense exchange during a live political segment, turned into an unexpectedly emotional moment when Ibrahim Traoré shared a few deeply personal words. Candace Owens, known for her strong on-air presence, was visibly shaken. Fighting back tears, she whispered, "I've never heard this before." The moment stunned viewers and became a viral symbol of truth piercing through politics. Monday evening, the lights were hot, the set was silent. Candace Owens adjusted her earpiece, her posture, sharp as steel. Across from her sat President Ibrahim. Calm and composed, this was his first major appearance on American television, and nobody expected it to be friendly. Candace leaned forward. "Let's talk facts," she said, voice crisp. "You lead a transitional government. Many in the West say that's unstable, isn't your people's hope." "Just another illusion." Traoré didn't flinch, he simply smiled gently. "Illusions don't bury children," he replied softly. Candace blinked. The air shifted before she could respond. He continued, "My people don't speak in headlines. They speak in hunger, in walking 10 kilometers for water, in holding on to hope with blistered hands." The room went quiet. This wasn't the combative, fire-spitting exchange the producers had expected in the control room. A director mouthed, "What's happening?" Candace sat back, slightly unsettled. He wasn't defensive, he wasn't political, he was personal. Something shifted behind her eyes, but no one could see it yet. Not yet. 10 minutes into the interview, Candace changed her tone just a little. She was still sharp, still probing, but she couldn't shake his calm. Then came the moment she asked a simple question. "Routine, really, President Traoré? What keeps you up at night?" He took a breath, looked down for a second, then lifted his eyes. "No fear, just truth. A boy named Solemin," he said. Candace hesitated. "Who is that?" "He was 6. We met in the countryside," he asked. "Me for a pencil, she repeated. Confused, Traoré nodded. He wanted to draw what happiness looked like, but he didn't have paper or a home. The silence was heavy now. "I promised him I'd come back with books with a school, but by the time I returned—" He paused just for a second. He was already gone. "Malaria." Candace's lips parted, her voice dropped. "I've never heard this before." She whispered, her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her notes and missed, and for the first time the cameras caught at a crack in her voice, a war of emotions behind her eyes, and a story that was no longer about politics, but about promises too late. Across America, across Africa, millions tuned in. What started as a political face-off had become something different, real, raw. Human. Candace tried to regain footing. "But you're a president," she said. "You can't help every child." "I know," he replied gently, "but I remember their names anyway." The screen behind them went dark. Producers had stopped adding graphics. The control room director simply whispered, "Let it breathe." Candace leaned forward again, this time not to argue, but to understand. "Why do you carry all of that?" Traoré didn't hesitate. "Because leadership without pain is just performance, and I did not come here to perform." Viewers everywhere, doctors on break, mothers with children, teachers in quiet classrooms, leaned in, deeply moved. Candace's hand brushed her eye. No one mentioned it, but everyone saw a tear. It wasn't drama, it was truth. And in that moment, across screens and hearts, something unplanned happened. People forgot they were watching an interview. They felt like they were watching history as the segment hit the 25-minute mark. Candace's producers were silently debating, should we cut to commercial, but something about the room made everyone freeze. Candace cleared her throat. "You said you remember the names. Is that really true?" President Traoré reached into his coat and pulled out a worn piece of paper. He unfolded it slowly. No drama, just care. Candace leaned in. It was a small photo. Creased and faded. "This is solely mine," he said. "He gave me a drawing the day we met. I keep it with me. The back has his name in his own handwriting." He turned it around. A child's shaky letters. Candace covered her mouth. "You still carry it?" she asked. Her voice cracking. "I carry many," he replied softly, "but this one reminds me why I cannot afford to forget." The camera zoomed in. Viewers saw the drawing, a sun, a house, a stick figure holding hands. With another, it was labeled in childish French EMUA President. Tears welled up again in Candace's eyes, and across homes worldwide, millions cried with her. Candace didn't know what to say. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was respect. Ibrahim Traoré continued quietly. Solemin had nothing yet. When I asked him what he dreamed of, he said, "To help you fix our village." He paused. I told him, "Wait for me, I'll come back with help, but malaria doesn't wait." The words cut through the studio like a knife. Candace whispered, "I'm so sorry." He nodded. "It's not pity, I want its memory." The room grew heavy. No one moved. "I broke a promise to a child," he said, "and now I lead a country full of promises, made and broken. Every time I speak, I ask myself, will this be another one?" Candace looked at him, eyes full of something unspoken respect, pain, maybe even guilt, and for the first time in years. She stopped arguing. Instead, she simply said, "What do you need to keep your next promise?" Traoré looked into the camera, and with quiet conviction he answered, "Not money, not aid, just the world's ears, and a little bit of heart." After the taping ended, the silence lingered. No one clapped, no one smiled. Candace sat in her chair, staring at nothing. The control room was quiet too, until the executive producer finally whispered, This is bigger than politics." Hours later, back in her dressing room, Candace's phone rang. It was her father. "I watched," he said. "I've never seen you like that." She said nothing. Then he added, "He didn't shame us, he reminded us." Candace nodded slowly, tears returning. "I thought I was going to challenge him, but he brought something out of me." She looked at the photo again, the drawing of Solemin. "I don't want this to be just a segment," she said. "It has to be more." The next day, without telling anyone, she made a call to a contact at a global education NGO. "I want to fund a school in Burkina Faso," she said. "For who?" "For a boy named Solemin," she whispered. And just like that, something shifted, not in policy, but in purpose. By morning, the interview clip had gone viral. It wasn't edited, it wasn't dramatized, it was just real 1-3-nut clip of Ibrahim Traoré holding up Solemin's drawing now had 47 million views. Like the promised Narralene and Traoré truth, flooded timelines. People across the world, from Ghana to Chicago, Paris to Johannesburg, were recording emotional reactions. One woman posted through tears, "I've never cried watching an interview. This broke me." But the most unexpected reaction came from Candace Owens herself. She posted the clip with no caption, just a black heart and the photo of the drawing. No one had ever seen her like that before. The silence in her words said everything. Ibrahim Traoré was still in the U.S., scheduled to speak at a private leadership event that evening, but plans began to shift. Phones rang, emails flew suddenly. People wanted more than politics. They wanted to hear the man behind the heartbreak, and perhaps unknowingly, the world was preparing itself for something rare: a leader who didn't raise his voice to be heard, but whose pain made everyone listen. Later that afternoon, Ibrahim sat quietly in his hotel room. He had no speech prepared for the event. His phone buzzed, nonstop. Journalists, organizers, even celebrities reaching out, but something else caught his attention. An envelope slid under the door. No name, no note, just one word written in black marker: mercy. He opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. It read, "Mr. President, I've hosted interviews with presidents, senators, even kings. I've debated them all, but today, I wasn't debating, I was listening. You didn't just talk, you reached into something I forgot. I had a conscience, a heart," I cried, "in front of the world, and I don't regret it. Thank you for reminding me what leadership really looks like." He folded the letter carefully, and for the first time in days, he closed his eyes and smiled. He hadn't come to America to win an argument. He had come with a memory, and somehow that memory was beginning to change people in New York City, 4,700 miles from Burkina Faso. A phone call took place. Candace Owens was on the line with the head of the Books Before Bombs Foundation. "Fund a school," she said. They were surprised. "Where?" "Burkina Faso, in a rural village. Name it after the boy Solemin." There was a pause. "Are you sure?" they asked. Candace took a breath. No politics, no press, just a promise fulfilled. Meanwhile, back in Ouagadougou, news of the viral interview had reached the streets. Mothers wept, watching the clip. Fathers paused radios to listen again. Solemin's mother, Owa, now older and quiet, saw her son's face on a phone screen. For the first time in years, she broke down. "That was his drawing," she whispered. "He used to show it to strangers." TR's aide approached him later that night. "Sir, should we respond to the media storm?" Ibrahim shook his head. "No, let them feel, let them think." He placed Solemin's drawing back in his jacket pocket. "It's never been about me," he said, "but now, maybe the world is ready to remember him." It was past midnight in New York, but Candace Owens couldn't sleep. Her hands trembled as she replayed. Haunted her, it wasn't the words, it was the silence that followed. Candace picked up her phone and called her producer. "I need to go to Burkina Faso," she said flatly. There was confusion. On the other end, "Why, the segment already aired. I know," she interrupted, "but I need to see something for myself. I need to find that boy's village." "You mean Solemin?" She nodded, even though no one could see her. "Yes, I want to understand what he meant." Inside, she knew something waited for her in the red dust of Burkina Faso. Not cameras, not debate. Candace arrived in Ouagadougou on a dusty Thursday morning unannounced. No press, no entourage, just her and a fixer who barely spoke English. They drove 4 hours through rural roads toward Kaya, the town Ibrahim had mentioned along the way. She noticed children walking barefoot to school, carrying books and plastic bags. Every face reminded her of him. Solemin. Bricks, this is where they said the boy lived. He pointed. Candace stepped out, heart pounding. She walked through the dry wind, each step heavier than the last. A woman in a faded blue dress sat outside, peeling mangoes. Candace approached Awa. The woman looked up, confused. "I'm looking for your son, Solemin." Awa froze for a moment. Time stood still. She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in years. Her lips trembled. "You knew my boy?" Candace swallowed the lump in her throat. "No," she whispered, "but someone who loved him very much told the world his story." And for the first time in her career, Candace Owens began to cry, not for ratings, but for a mother she never knew, and a boy who changed a president. AA led Candace into her small home. The floor was hard earth. A wooden bench sat in the corner beside a faded photo on the wall. It was solely his smile, wide as eyes, hopeful. "He wore that blue shirt every day," Awa said, touching the picture gently, even when it tore. Candace stared at the photo. Her chest tight. "Ibrahim said he promised Solemin a school," she said quietly, "but he never got the chance to build it." Awa nodded, eyes moist. "There was an attack in the region. Days after their visit, everything was abandoned. We were moved. We never saw him again." Candace sat still for a long time, then she took. "The boy in the blue shirt must be remembered." She looked at Awa. "I don't want to just report this, I want to help finish what he started." Awa placed a worn hand on hers. "You've come far, daughter." Surrounded by silence and sun, something deep inside her began to change. Not as a journalist, but as a human being. That evening, back in her guest house, Candace Owens found an envelope slipped under her door. There was no name, just handwriting that read, "For the one who asked about the boy, Traoré." Candace sat down and read it out loud. "My little brother, I promised you a school. I failed you, but I will not let the sleep peacefully." Her eyes welled up. She knew instantly this was not meant to be seen by the public. It was personal. It was a secret. Shook her. "This isn't just a story anymore," she whispered. "This is a legacy. And just no politics, just honesty." They met in a small courtyard behind the presidential residence. No guards, no microphones, just 2 chairs and the sound of crickets. She handed him the letter. "I found this." He stared at it for a long time. Then slowly his fingers reached out and brushed it gently. "I thought it was lost," he said softly. "I didn't know." Nodded, and in that quiet, something changed between them. Not a journalist and a president, but to people who carried a boy's memory and were ready to freshly painted Solemin Foundation education for every child. She turned to the camera. "I'm here as a witness." She paused, holding back tears. "I met a mother who still speaks to her son in her dreams. I met a president who wrote a letter he never thought anyone would read, and I found a boy gone too soon who changed everything." Candace looked into the lens. "You've seen the clips, you've seen me cry, but now I ask you, don't let this be a moment, let it be a movement." The feed cut to footage of children playing where the foundation would be built. Donations poured in, comments flooded the stream, and for the first time in her career, Candace Owens wasn't trending for what she said, but for what she felt. This wasn't about left or right anymore. This was about right and wrong, and it was just the beginning. For days after the segment aired, Candace Owens returned to the site. Construction had not begun yet, but the land no longer felt empty. Children were already there, running barefoot. Quietly, no media, no grand speeches. He crouched beside a boy, writing the word hope in the soil. "Do you know who Solemin was?" he asked gently. The child shook his head. "He was a boy like you, brave, smart, but the world failed him, so now we build something better." Trop reached into his pocket and placed a small carved wooden nameplate in the dirt. "Solemin's class." It was hand-carved. Clearly, old Candace realized it must have been made years ago. When the promise was still a dream, she wiped her eyes again and whispered to herself, "This is what truth looks like." It was posted, it spread like wildfire, but something unusual happened. No one argued in the comments. There were no political debates. Just pain and hope, people from all. "I'm naming my first child Soli. Thank you, President Trump." Another said, "For once I saw a leader act like a father, not a king, and it healed something in me." "I saw the sign," she said, smiling through tears. "You kept your word, Ibrahim." He looked down, overwhelmed. "I tried. I'm still trying." Her voice was soft but firm, and that's all we ever asked that someone try the screen. Went dark, he sat in silence, the weight of forgiveness resting gently on his shoulders. 1 week to the... She pressed record and spoke directly to the people. This wasn't supposed to happen. She began it. Was meant to be just another interview, but something broke through. She held up the wooden name. President Ibrahim Traoré didn't just speak truth, he lived it, and that truth changed me. She took a deep breath. I've covered 1,000 stories. None ever made me cry like this. None ever reminded me that the smallest voices, like Solemin's, are the ones that echo the loudest. Candace paused, then smiled gently to everyone watching. If this story touched, you don't just scroll past leave. A comment for Solemin, share it with someone who's lost hope, and, most importantly, hit that like button, subscribe, and help us carry this message further than politics ever could. She leaned forward, whispering, "Let's not let this be the end. Let's make it the beginning." And with that, she ended the broadcast, but the world was just beginning to